All right, let's go ahead and get started. Hi, everybody. Happy Wednesday, and thanks so much for joining us today. My name is Ari Moladina, and I am the Renewable Energy Program Manager with Colorado Energy Office. I'm really excited to share some information with all of you about the Automated Permit Processing for Solar Grant Program, or APPS for short. And I do want to quickly note that this webinar is going to be recorded. So we'll be sharing the slides and the recording on the APPS program website early next week. So to cover a brief agenda of today's call, we'll start with the background of the APPS program and review the program goals. We'll also cover what automated permitting is and how it can help your jurisdiction. Then we'll review funding awards and the evaluation process. We'll also cover what costs are considered allowable under this program and the reimbursement process. And then we'll go through the steps to apply for the grant and finally go over Q&A. And if you do have questions about the program throughout the webinar, feel free to drop them in the chat and we'll work to address those during the Q&A or include them in the FAQs later on. And before we move on, I do want to note that I'm not going to go into too much detail on the automated permitting platforms themselves today. This is going to be focused a bit more high level on the grant program and the application process. However, both SolarApp and Symbian are hosting demo webinars next Wednesday and Thursday. So I highly encourage you to register for those. They're going to be providing information on how those platforms work, walk you through a live demo, and provide lots of time for questions. So I'll add those links to the chat right now. Great. All right, so what is the APPS program? APPS is a $1 million grant program through Colorado Energy Office that provides financial assistance to local and tribal governments for the adoption of an automated online solar permitting platform. There's three main program goals for this initiative. The first is really to help streamline the residential solar and storage permitting process throughout the state. So we know that permitting can be a time and cost-intensive process, both for local government staff and for applicants that are applying for permits. So ultimately, this is an effort to make permitting more efficient for everybody while still ensuring the code compliance and safety of those projects. The second goal is to provide local governments with staff with the capacity to adopt these platforms. Even though the automated permitting software itself is free, we recognize that many jurisdictions don't have the capacity or the time to adopt these platforms. So this fund was created to provide financial assistance for any costs associated with adopting a platform, whether that's your internal staff time, any training that you do, IT time, training of local installers, and we'll cover those in a bit more detail in a few slides. And the third goal is to prepare for future growth. So even if solar permitting isn't a burden for your jurisdiction right now, the industry is projected to see a good amount of growth in the future. So automated permitting can really help your jurisdiction get ahead of that. And before we move on, I'd love to just get a general sense of everyone's current knowledge of automated permitting and what your lead time looks like in your jurisdiction for permitting. So if you don't mind participating, this is an anonymous survey, and I will just give everybody a minute or so to answer these two questions. Right, a few more seconds to fill out that survey. So I'll just share those results quickly. Looks like we have a pretty even split between people feeling extremely familiar, knowing a little bit, or never having heard of automated permitting. And then in terms of permitting lead time, looks like we've got quite a distribution, the most in that less than 1 day period, which is awesome. And then we have quite a split between the rest of the timelines. So thanks, everybody. All right, so moving on to what is APPS. So APPS is a $1 million grant fund through CEO. Oh, sorry, repeating slides. Moving on, what is an automated permitting platform? So automated permitting platforms are online portals that verify the code compliance of permit applications and issue permits in real time. So these platforms enable a user to enter in all the solar system details that they would normally fill out in a permit application, and it then verifies the code compliance and can issue a permit right then. The system can also provide real-time feedback to users. So as it's checking those details, if it finds an issue with the code compliance, the system will provide that feedback to the user and require that they make any adjustments necessary for compliance before the user can finish the process and receive the permit. Ultimately, these platforms can bring the processing time down to 30 minutes and usually even less than that once people get familiar with using the platforms. And again, that's because they're scanning and verifying that in real time. One important thing to note is these platforms are not replacing the inspections process. So that is going to stay exactly the same. These platforms are really just streamlining the permitting stage of the solar process. So an installer would receive a permit, install the system, and then they'd still need to call and schedule that inspection the same way as they typically would. Now to go over some benefits of automated permitting. The first one is going to be that it saves staff time. So these platforms can typically process about 80 to 90% of standard permits that government staff are normally going to be reviewing manually. So this cuts down on workload for staff and gives them more time to focus on more complicated or nuanced projects or just other workload that they might have. And these platforms are not going to replace your permitting procedure because not all of the permits will be able to go through these platforms or will need to go through them, but they will be able to take about 80 to 90% of that volume. So this just provides an option to streamline the permit applications that are a little bit more standard. And these platforms can also help reduce errors. Because they're providing that real-time feedback, users can update errors right then and there, and that can help decrease the back and forth that might normally occur between a jurisdiction and an applicant. And finally, these platforms can help people go solar faster. There's fewer barriers and delays, so Coloradans can get their solar systems installed faster and start benefiting from them quickly. Now to go over some details of the grant itself. As I mentioned, there's a total of $1 million available in this fund. And this is a non-competitive grant, which is a little bit unique. This means we're not going to be comparing applications to one another, but instead we'll use a pass, no pass evaluation process, and we'll grant awards based on the fulfillment of evaluation criteria. This is a pretty straightforward checklist that we share in the grant guidance. So essentially, if you receive a pass evaluation, you'll receive an award and CEO will allocate the max funding that's available to your jurisdiction. This is also a first come, first serve application process. So we're going to evaluate applications on a rolling basis, and we'll do that until the funding is expended. There is an application deadline for this of June 4th, but if we don't expend all the funds by that point, we'll host another round of applications. I do recommend getting in your applications as soon as possible to make sure that you have the best chance at eligibility for the funding. And then in terms of maximum awards, these are going to be based on the population of your jurisdiction. So they'll range from 40,000 up to 100,000. And you can see the breakdown of those funding awards in the chart below. So you'd look at your jurisdiction's population and then find the corresponding max funding award. And one thing to note is that this is just the max funding award that you would be eligible for. Your actual award is going to be based on the budget that you submit and that CEO approves, but this is just showing the max allocation amount that'll be awarded to you. So looking at allowable costs, essentially any cost necessary to adopt a solar permitting platform should be covered by this grant. So that's going to include any in-house staff time, if you have internal or external meetings, if you utilize your IT team, if you train internal staff on how to use the platform. Additionally, if you hire a third-party consultant to help with adoption of the platform, that would be covered. If you organize any training for local solar installers or contractors, that's considered reimbursable. Any installation fees for adopting the platform is included, as well as any integration fees. So if you integrate a solar permitting platform into your general permitting system, whether that's in a Acela or a Tyler Tech, those integration fees are also included. Maintenance fees up to 3 years are included. So if you need to make updates to software or add additional capabilities. And then finally, this is pretty unlikely, but if you need any hardware or equipment, this will also be included. So there is a 180-day implementation timeline required with this grant program. So essentially the 180 days starts once you've signed the grant agreement with our office. And from that point, you have about 180 days or 6 months to adopt the platform. Most of the time, implementation can be done in far less time than this, so there shouldn't be too much of an issue. And once the platform is adopted and we verify the adoption, you'll be able to submit all of your invoices and receipts for reimbursement. One note is if your jurisdiction has already started adopting a platform, you're still eligible for this grant and can apply for any future funds that you need for implementation. And then one note for the maintenance fees. So these are covered for up to 3 years from the date that you enter into the agreement with CEO. We do, however, need proof of encumbrance of those funds within that first 180-day window. So you don't need to expend the funds, but we would need some sort of proof that you are agreeing to pay for those fees for the next however many years. All right, and then in terms of the application process, it's fairly simple and straightforward. So the first part is going to be the APPS grant application form. This is a 4-page PDF document, and we've tried to keep it really straightforward. So it's going to be all check boxes and simple form fields that you can fill out. I don't think it'll take more than 10 minutes. The second piece is going to be the APPS budget form. And this might take a little bit more time, but it's still quite straightforward. So you'll fill in your estimated costs for the different budget categories. So the allowable costs we just went over, in-house staff time, consulting fees, maintenance, etc. And this is another opportunity for me to plug the webinars next week with Solar App and Symbiom. Attending those will give you a little bit better of an idea of what those time requirements might look like, and any kind of specific needs that your jurisdiction might have. And then the last piece is just going to be submitting a copy of your building department's current permitting and inspection process. So this can literally just be what you currently post on your website as your process for permitting and inspection. So in terms of next steps, applications are now open. You can find all the materials to apply on our program website, which I'll add to the chat now. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me directly. My email is gov_ceo_apps@state.co.us. I will put that in the chat as well. And then finally, be sure to register for the demo webinars. That's going to be next Wednesday and next Thursday at 11 a.m. So I'll put all that information in the chat right now. All right. That is all I have for today. So I will now open the floor for any questions anyone has. Yes, there will be a recording of this sent out. We'll probably post the slides and the recording of this presentation early next week. So I see another question. Who at the state can speak with jurisdictions? Oh, can jurisdictions speak with concerning general permitting of residential PV systems? I'm not sure I understand that question, Carol. Do you mind elaborating a little bit? I think if you're asking just generally about PV permitting at the residential level, that would be me. I'm the Renewable Energy Program Manager. So you can certainly get in touch with me, and I'll put my personal email here as well. Yeah, Carol, feel free to reach out to me and I can help address your question. Any other questions? Feel free to put them in the chat. Carol just wrote, is Symbian similar to Solar App? That's a really great question. Yes, in certain capacities, they're both automated permitting platforms. I think both Solar App and Symbian can speak a little bit more in detail to the specific capabilities. So would definitely recommend attending the webinars next week. But in terms of eligibility for this grant program, they are both eligible platforms and enable a user to enter in the details of a solar permitting or a storage system and receive an instant permit. And they're doing the code compliance and those verifications in a similar way. So both of them are online automated permitting platforms that are eligible for the apps grant program. And then I would just say to really get a sense of what the platforms look like and what the user experience is and answer any targeted questions that you have, I would attend the webinars next week because they'll be going into a lot of detail of exactly what that looks like. So I see another question. How does this program expedite the submittal process required by electrical utility companies? Most utility companies require a submittal and approval prior to the building department's permit issuance. So at a high level, what I know is that both platforms are able to install kind of a requirement for the user, which would require them to upload that utility approval form prior to receiving the permit. So again, would recommend attending the demo webinars next week to kind of get more of those details, but I know that both of them do have the ability to require a user to upload documentation and proof before being able to receive that permit. So I think there is some level of customization abilities for both of them in terms of what your jurisdiction's specific needs are before wanting to grant that permit to somebody. Is this program limited to single family homes and duplexes, or includes other residential occupancies such as IRC townhomes and apartment buildings? Carol, that's a really good question. And I might need to follow up with you on that one. I'll write that down and make sure I get an answer about that. Did I see that covered costs, that costs would be covered for installer training? Yes. So if your jurisdiction decides to host installer trainings, those costs are included. So that includes any staff time you take to plan that installer training, any outreach you do, if you rent some sort of facility for training, if you create training materials, all of those costs are going to be included. And I think that's generally a best practice, when you adopt a platform like this, to assemble some sort of trainings for installers so they get familiar with how to use the platforms and just feel really efficient and comfortable with them. And so any of those training costs would be included. Yes, and someone just put in the chat the contact for Symbiom. So that's hello@symbiom.com. If you have any specific questions, you can feel free to reach out to them directly. Oh, and I just see Symbiom does cover residential uses other than single family and duplexes. These are great questions. Keep them coming. And we have the Solar App contact in the chat as well, which is team@solar-app.org. Oh, I'm seeing that these are not. Let me put those in the chat for everybody. Any last questions? Have any Colorado jurisdictions used Symbiom yet? Very familiar with Solar App, but not with Symbiom. That is a great question. No, there are not any Colorado jurisdictions using Symbiom yet. There are a number of jurisdictions in California that have onboarded Symbiom. And I think in Colorado, there are currently 2 jurisdictions that have onboarded Solar App. And there might be more working on adoption, but not yet in Colorado. I think we just have 2 jurisdictions in Colorado that have adopted automated permitting. So hopefully with this grant funding and the more awareness, we'll see more jurisdictions adopting automated permitting, but quite a few jurisdictions in California have adopted Symbiom. Yes, and someone just added the city and county of Denver and then Bennett, Colorado are using Solar App currently. What is the cost to the jurisdiction for these platforms once the grants are exhausted? So I will say, I think attending the webinars next week will give you the clearest sense, but my understanding is that there's generally no ongoing costs for these softwares. There might be an initial installation fee, but there's no sort of like ongoing maintenance costs. So it's really just, the time it might take your jurisdiction to adopt them, an integration fee. That I guess might be the more ongoing cost, is like if you have Acela, if you have Tyler Tech, if they charge some sort of annual fee to integrate Solar App or Symbian into them, that would be kind of perhaps an ongoing cost. And those would be included with the grant, like I mentioned before, as a maintenance cost. You just need to encumber those within that 180-day period. But again, I would attend the webinars next week to just make sure that is accurate. Any information on whether Symbian can respond quickly to any C code updates? Solar App had this issue, but has resolved it as of recently in Denver. My understanding is that Symbian can respond quickly to any C code updates. And they did just open the program in Colorado this week. But my understanding is they're able to respond to those updates quite quickly as well. And then I'm just hearing from my Solar App and Symbian folks in the chat here. So to update everybody, no ongoing costs for Symbian or Solar App. So if there's updates to code cycles or regulations, if any of that changes or updates, that's not going to change any sort of ongoing costs. I got a great question in the chat. Yes, so the question is, will this reimburse staff time for implementation? And if so, is this at a flat rate or their actual salary? Really good question. This does reimburse staff time, any staff time that's utilized to implement a platform. And this is the rate of their actual salary. So when you submit the budget form, we have room for you to list all of the staff members that might be involved with implementation, what their hourly rate is, and then how many hours you foresee them spending to implement the software. So all of that staff time is included and at a rate of their actual salary. Okay, so I see a couple more questions. Can you speak on the difference in compliance checks between Solar App and Symbian? I'm going to leave that to the Solar App and Symbian experts next week during the demo webinars. I think they both have a really detailed understanding of exactly what compliance checks looks like on the back end and how they build that into their system. So if you want to know a little bit more about what the compliance verification looks like, definitely encourage you to sign up for the webinars next week. How much does it cost the customer to use Symbian per project? That's a really great question. So there is a fee for the user or the contractor or the installer. And I believe that fee is $50 per application for Symbian and $25 for Solar App. And so that's going to be a flat fee that an installer pays for that permit application. That's not a jurisdiction cost. That's just what the installer pays. And that's really for, the convenience of being able to get that permit instantly. And I see a question about the rate for staff time, is that estimated or real time? That's a really good question. So when you're filling out the budget application form, all of those costs are going to be estimated because obviously you don't know exactly what, how much time it's going to take. CEO will approve your budget form and allocate a certain amount of funding to your jurisdiction. And then when you submit your invoices and receipts, that'll include the real time. So that'll include, however much time your jurisdiction has expended for implementation, and those will be reimbursed. And I think that's actually a good point. There is an ability to increase the amount of funding that your jurisdiction will receive if you find it necessary. So if you get a grant approved for $45,000, but your jurisdiction's eligible to receive, let's say, $60,000, and throughout the implementation process, you realize we actually need closer to $55,000. There is an ability to resubmit a budget form, and then we would go through the approval process again and update the amount that your jurisdiction is eligible to receive. So budget form is going to be estimating costs to the best of your ability, but there is an ability to update that and increase the amount that you'll receive. Great question. I see another question, which is, can money be granted retroactively if a jurisdiction has already implemented one of the two programs? Unfortunately, not. We can't grant money retroactively. However, if there are still some sort of needs for future implementation, or if there's an update that you're looking to make that you think will cost, take some staff time or cost anything, or if you have ongoing maintenance costs that you're still paying, you can apply for this grant and receive funding for future expended costs. We unfortunately can't reimburse for costs that have already been expended prior to entering agreement with CEO. All right. One last call for any more questions. Seeing a couple more. During the review and approval in the Solar App and Symbian platforms, do these systems review structural engineering documents for the structure receiving the PV system? That is a good question. My understanding is that these platforms do have the ability to review structural engineering documents, but I think that question might be a little bit better for the Solar App and Symbian teams themselves. I see one more question. Does the state have any kilowatt limitation on what Solar App can be used for, or Symbian? I'm not sure about that question. I will also take that one and include that in the FAQs. I see a question. Could money be granted if a jurisdiction wants to switch programs from Solar App to Symbium or Symbium to Solar App? Yes, I believe so. I don't see any reason why this funding couldn't be used to do that. I will verify that, but I believe so. And then I did receive some answers from our folks at Solar App and Symbium. Symbium has detailed questions about reviewing structural integrity of the installation. Documents are not reviewed, but they ask the questions to get at the same answer. And then Solar App can review the structural design for single family homes. Solar App has added, or sorry, the city of Denver has added rafter tables to Solar App. All right. Not seeing any more questions come through. So I think we can go ahead and wrap everything up. Thank you again, everybody, for attending today. And feel free to reach out to me directly if you have any questions. I will just put my contact information and the program website in the chat once more. And again, these slides will be posted on the apps program webpage. We'll also include a recording of this presentation. And yeah, go submit your applications. Looking forward to seeing them. Have a great day, everyone.